Full of Eldridge Culverwell, and you heard from my dad earlier on talking about Zimbabwe, and I remember in 2014 and before, but certainly 2014, Narendra said to me soon after the election, if things go badly, and some of you will know his views on the leadership of the council then, he said you could join ZANU-PF and set up your own group, and his advice was it could be worse than the current Labour leadership then. I of course have no view on that, but there was a mixture of passion, of education, of motivation, of inspiration too. And just after Eldridge and Mike Kakata, who's a councillor in St Anne's, were elected last May, we got a text message saying that time come, when are you going to form the Zimbabwean caucus of councillors on Haringey Council? Something we probably should do actually, Eldridge, in tribute. Look, just to wind up. Firstly, he had the most unique ability to follow what you were doing, right? So, as you noted, Don and I got involved super young, playing my mother and father who are sitting there. I was in my first leaf at the 1992 general election as a small kid, so don't blame me for turning out the way I have. And he was always part of the Labour family here, right? We've heard all night the key role he played. Certainly for me as a young person growing up, he was there. I remember him. So my sister and Barbara, the four men people, was in Green, shared a birthday. And Barbara would always pop in. She couldn't drive, but she'd always pop in to my sister's birthday party as a kid. And talking to Mum and Dad after we heard that Narendra died, we were sharing memories, and he was there. He turned up at my sister's birthday, having driven Barbara around in the 2005 election. So he was a fixture. I know you guys in Knoll Park context will feel that too. And just one last thing. I turned 21 whenever I turned 21, but it was a month to the day after both my grandmothers died on the same day. So it was a massively difficult and painful and whatever else time for me and my family. And we had big plans for a birthday party and the rest of it all scrapped. But my folks insisted that we did something at the house, and we did. And I suppose mindful of the fact that I was so a student, who was very proud of my African roots and was studying African history, what would you get for a 21-year-old? Not money, Muslims, obviously not alcohol, not sweets, nothing sporty. I got a copy of the 1980 ZANU-PF manifesto from... I swear to God, honestly, I've got it at home. I found it when I heard that he passed, and it's in crisp condition, right? So either he hadn't read it, or he had surplus copies. But he was able to, and someone earlier, Catherine West, I think, noted that he was kind, and that kindness, that thoughtfulness, that understanding of who I was, what I was interested in, what motivated me, I think was exemplified in that gift for a 21-year-old, and I will keep that to give my first child when they turn 21.
We've got Emine with us as well, who's currently Deputy Leader of the Council, the first woman of Turkish descent to hold the post. I'm sure Narendra is smiling, even as I say that. He would have been delighted, would he not?
Absolutely, and I suppose my first experience of Narendra was actually when I was quite young. He was my ward councillor, so when I moved to Knoll Park at around the age of 12, he was our neighbour. I always joked with him that we could see his back garden from our second floor, and what I would say is when a councillor is doing a good job, and a 12-year-old knows who their local councillor is, and that says a lot. And I would also say that about we knew who these people were. So in terms of also what he taught me when I met him many years later in a more in a political capacity, was about holding the door open for other people, and many people know I'm a little bit of a connoisseur of internal Labour Party elections, and he was always very encouraging. He was like, "Emine, what are you standing for again?" And I was like, so I remember when I stood for the NCC, and So he put out a tweet, and I know you did this to Seema as well, and it was at meetings because Emine has had the highest vote ever in the Labour Party, 145,000 votes. And I was like, Narendra, they were CLP block votes, they weren't individual. And he took me to one side and he said, Emine, never do yourself down, never do that, well done, and always accept praise, even in those kind of circumstances. And it was also about encouragement, and it was also about saying, and he would see a positive in anything that involved black representation. And hearing Roger earlier on, I totally see that. It was like, stand for as many positions as you think that you can do. But also, when we had some recent campaigns in Haringey, some recent turmoil as well over the Haringey development vehicle, he's advised to me, and I would regularly just, when I was at my mum's, I would pop round, and he would always say to me, come to me for advice, and he would be offended if I didn't come as regularly. And he would say to me, to put socialism into action, you need to have an alternative. And it's all well and good, kind of being oppositional, but what you've got to come forward with is a practical alternative, which absolutely, when I heard John speaking earlier on, that's exactly who Narendra was, and it wasn't all talk, it was action as well. And for me, that's the absolute key. But again, it was the personal encouragement. Just one other little story. When I, at the snap general election, I had the honour of trying to bring socialism to Carshalton and Wallington, and his response to that was, I was like, Narendra, but we come third there. You do realise, don't you? And he was just so positive about it. And then on the day after the general election, he texted me, he goes, Emine, I've looked, and you got the highest swing to Labour in a tactical voting seat. And I'm like, that is so Narendra. And I said, yes, Narendra, in every seat beginning with the letter C. I can ask you for what it actually did.
Well, it is something of a, no park meeting and gathering here. Well, you're the only person who comes from the posh side of Haringey.
You can't walk down the Body High Street, brother, we'll talk.
One of these days. Yeah, of course there is. Peray, what do you remember? Did Narendra give you advice, or did he give you the ZANU PF manifesto to read?
Well, I'm not sure how I feel. I've been told I'm not posh as well. So I first met Narendra in 2012 when I joined the Labour Party. Seema veteran now, really. And me, Emine and Seema, we were around his house. It was a committee room. We were there for the London elections at the time. And, I remember the hustle and bustle, and there was this man sat there, just sort of holding, imparting advice. Didn't think much of it, and then I decided to stand in 2014 in Knoll Park, and the first stop, as everyone in the Haringey Labour Party here knows, is Narendra's house. If you're going to stand in Knoll Park, you pay the pilgrimage to Narendra's house. That's what you do. You go around there, and then they followed endless meetings around there, sitting down, and he'd share his stories, and he'd have the magazine. I think he got it up in one of the pictures, the Battle of Wood Green. And I think what was important for me as someone who was born and bred in Haringey, and specifically Wood Green, was that it was given a social slant, a political slant on what I'd experienced growing up. Both my parents were immigrants that came to the country in the 50s and 60s. And we speak of the Battle of Wood Green. And you know, I just, you know, when I asked my mum about it recently, she just said, "Oh, yeah, I remember some noise, but we hid." You know, my mum was a piecework machinist, my dad was a welder. You know, we hid. They weren't political. They kept their head down. That was what they were told to do. And just hearing from someone like Narendra about how people were organising and resisting and how they were doing it was really inspirational and gave me that sort of inspiration to go forward at the time. And I should say it was a real privilege to speak at the Battle of Wood Green. Steve organised a commemoration event 2 years ago, and I stood up and spoke there. But I think one of the important lessons from tonight, and from everyone who's spoken at Narendra, was actually how the struggle does continue. And although we've heard about how bad it was 20 years ago, 30 years ago, and it was worse. It was only 3 years ago, on the day of the EU referendum, I was stood on Wood Green High Road, our beloved Wood Green, and a man said, "I'm voting out because I already live next door to 10 dirty Turks." And I said to him, "Well, I'm Turkish," and he went, "Yeah, I know." And campaigning around Knoll Park, I mean, me, Khaled, Emine, we're legacy. You know, 3 of us in the ward, you know, 2 of us are Turkish, 1 of us Bangladeshi or Muslim. And that's a real achievement. But again, last year, canvassing on one of the estates, you know, I had racial abuse. I couldn't believe it. This is Wood Green, you know. So the struggle does go on, and that door was opened, and the battle was there, but they're still there, and we can't forget that, especially with the rise of the far right. And I just wanted to say about Narendra as well. One thing is he was always very much about the local. Yes, he was involved in national politics, but he was absolutely about the local. You couldn't walk down Wood Green High Road without seeing him in one of the coffee shops. I think except when he was off visiting the family or watching the cricket. But he was very about the locals. I'd often get a phone call saying, "What's going on, England? What have you done?" You know, and I'd sort of defend myself and say, "No, that's not me." And he'd say, "Not good enough. The perception is you're the councillor. What are you doing about it?" You know, and he'd never let me forget those events. You know, however big or small, not just big political events, cultural events, all events. You know, he'd always remind me, you know, this is your work as a councillor. Remember where you're coming from. Always remember your roots, okay, and remain rooted. That's really important. So I did share a love of Wood Green, not of Tottenham Hotspur. I should hasten to add. Apologies. Yeah. Apologies. So, but I think it's.
So I met Narendra in 2010 when I became chair of Knoll Park Labour Party. And I remember going to his house, and he was telling me, he said, "Look, we have a bank account for the Knoll Park Labour Party in the core bank. And in that bank account, there is some money there. But the treasurer and the other signatory, they've since moved away. So can you find out how you get that money out?" Now, 9 years later today, we're still talking about that account, and we don't know. We still haven't managed to get the money out of that account. So that was in 2010. And 2017, last year, when I was seeking nomination to become a candidate in Knoll Park, I asked him to write an endorsement so that I could use in my leaflet. So he said, "Why didn't you do a first cut?" And I'll look at it. I did a first cut, and then I sent it to him, and it came back, and there were all these additional points. He goes, "Khaled, why have you not mentioned your work as a solicitor, experience of arbitration and mediation? These are the skills that you'll need as a councillor, and also your language skills." So that was really the way, as has been mentioned by so many, you know, holding the door open and inspiring the next generation of BAME politicians. He not only gave encouragement, he actually, during the selection campaign, canvassed members, making sure that I was successful and in securing my nomination. He even ferried people in his favourite Mazda to go to the selection meeting. And then during the election campaign, I'll say it was around this time last year, so the election was in May, I remember going to his house to put up a garden stake in front of his house. He said, "Look, I'm going to come with you." And we go to the end of his road. In the corner, there was Martin Appadou's house, another ex-Knoll Park councillor. So the house was in the corner, so you had the benefit of the garden going round the bend, and he said, we will need, so I had the stakes in the back of my car. I took a couple of stakes out. He said, we're going to need a dozen. I said, why are we going to need a dozen? He said, look, we're going to line them up in the garden, and then he explained to me, because where the garden is strategically opposite the polling station. And he goes, when the voters are going into the polling station, it's going to send a subliminal message that I said, look, you can't get more subliminal than that. So he was there with me that afternoon. We must have put up about a dozen garden stakes. He said, look, back in my day, we used to have banners going, massive banners going up on the house. So he wasn't just about giving words of encouragement. He was there out, giving me, lending me his hand. And so, as a young socialist and as an anti-racist campaigner, I look up to him, and he's always supported everything that I've done. So recently, I helped to organise a protest vigil. This was on the 1st of April this month. There was a young woman who was attacked in Turnpike Lane tube station, a Muslim woman whose hijab was ripped off. And we did a protest vigil with 24 hours notice. Of course, Narendra was there. And last year, again around this time, we were doing a fundraising dinner for Haringey Stand Up to Racism. And that's the time when I went to his house to put up the garden stake. He had a rummage through his archive, and he gave me 2 historic documents, big posters of one of Stephen Lawrence, the other one of Ruhullah Aramish, 2 young men who were tragically murdered by racists. And I then got those historic documents auctioned at the Haringey Stand Up to Racism. Milena, who spoke earlier, brought one of them. Yeah, she brought one of the, she bid for that and she won it in auction. So
I'm going to cut you short.
That's it. I'm
going to cut you short.
Thank you.
Only because we're running about 20 minutes late. I have to apologise. I have to apologise to everybody here. Thank you.